Welcome you all to Trek Wars. Alright, so today's episode we're going to be talking about the history of the D-4 battlecruiser that was created in 2118 known as the Dama class. So this ship is very old and it has been around since the same time period as the original NX Enterprise class. And I want to talk about its history and what happened to it and why it fell out of favor with the Klingon Empire. Alright, so this ship has been in service for almost 100 years. So the D-4 battlecruiser is known as the Dama class. Its length is 205 meters. Its beam is 130, its draft is 45, and its mass is 84,600. And it has a crew of 305 crew members. It's armed with 5 standard disruptor banks, and its cruising speed is warp 4, its maximum speed is warp 6. Okay, so the ship is famous for the derail type secondary hull, and it's similar in designs of like what we'll see with future ships like the D5, the K5, the D6, and the D7. So this is the original ship that had that unique design to the Klingons do. What is the reasoning for that unique design? It's probably what I should be talking about. It's built for speed. So the long neck design that the Klingons have makes it very optimized for quick, rapid warp speeds. So when you look at the original D4, the very first variant that was created in 2218, and then you'll see there are new variants of the D4, which kind of have the more of the Katanga type look to them. And there are also other D4s that are very strange out there that are completely unique and almost look like weird submarines. Now, the reason for this is Klingons belong to clans and great houses, and they're not one consistent empire. For most of the Klingon Empire, they spent most of the time fighting themselves, and the D4 is more of a designation and not telling you a specific type. So there's lots of different type of D4 variants depending on your house and their unique designs. So each house kind of has their own slight designs, but for the most part, there is one simple design for the D4. All right, so first and foremost, one of the things we should understand about the D4 is the D4 is a class, and this kind of unique is the D4 is more of a designation of what a class is and not really telling you what kind of ship it is, because there are multiple different variants of the D4, and we'll just kind of look at them. So most D4s kind of have this skinny Katanga looking kind of look to them. And these would be probably the newer variants of this ship. So the ships have been built probably in the last 20 to 30 years. Now, the D4 that we know from, obviously, from Enterprise is probably the oldest variant and is probably used by the lesser houses. So greater houses, medium houses, and great houses are using the variant in front of you. All right, so those of you who have been watching my series, you'll understand that we have a breakdown, have an understanding. So the shield index of the D4s would be around 0.85. Its hold off is 5.57. Its refreshment rate is 1 with a breakdown of 1.20. So the shielding aboard these ships are weaker than most ships out there during this time period. But this ship was built in mass, and it's been the frontline cruiser for the Klingon Empire for quite a long time. Now, looking at this ship, now the fleet all of these ships, there are about 80 of these starships, so there's a significant amount of them in the Klingon Empire. Their ECM is very poor at 75. Their hull strength is 84,600, which during this time period means that they can hold off this pretty good amount of damage after the shields go down. Now their length is 205, making them a rather large ship, and their crew is 305, which means they have huge crew. And if you have a huge crew like this, it means there's not a lot of automation. And their cargo capacity is 80, which is relatively not impressive. Now, when we look at their impulse, it's 0.78. Their warp power is 0.65. Their optimal speed is 4. Their max is 6. So overall, they're relatively decent stats when it comes to warp speeds. Not the greatest. It doesn't have a whole lot of power, and it's relatively slow for impulse speeds. Like I said, there are multiple variants. of these starships, and some of the would say the D7 submineral looks are the more advanced and probably the newer designs. Their sensors are 0.65, short is 0.65, shuttles are 5, cost is around 85, 229. So from a Klingon perspective, this ship is relatively expensive due to its size, and its performance level is relatively low. Now, we look at its weapons, its phaser power is 0.75. This is dramatically low, but that's due to the ship being so old, and the design of the warp core itself isn't really pushing out that much power. Now, it says it has 5 disruptors, and normally 5 disruptors is a pretty respectable amount of firepower, but by the time we start getting into the 2200s, especially around 2223, 2224, I wouldn't even consider these actually disruptors. I would probably consider this ship using medium disruptors because the power levels would be so low compared to modern disruptors by the Klingon Empire. Now, to truly understand the perspective of the Klingons is the D-4 was a dedicated warship, and it was a frontline battleship. And it had won many battles against the Gorn, the Romulans, and many other foes. And it was decorated as one of the oldest and most reliable starships that the Klingon Empire had. Now, we're going to look at things from the Klingon Council perspective. So, the Great Houses came up with this idea or this thought that they actually thought that the Federation was the ancient enemy known as the Herc. And to understand this from a Klingon perspective, this is more along the lines of them thinking that this is this ancient enemy that is coming back to retake the Klingon Empire away from them. And as crazy as this sounds, this actually terrified the Klingons. Now, we don't really think about the Klingons as being scared or a race that could be intimidated, but you got to understand this from the perspective of the Klingons, that this isn't just an enemy that you're going to go out and fight. This is the enemy. And in their lore and in their history, the Herc are basically this unbelievably dangerous, evil foe. They're basically what humans think as demons. And they were absolutely terrified, or at least a large portion of the great councils were terrified in the great houses that this is the enemy. And so they became very, very vigilant to watching what the Federation was doing. So because of this, in 2223, a fleet of D4s is sent to Verka 2. And so what ends up happening is the Klingons engage Federation starships in a full-out battle with actual Federation battleships. So what ends up happening is they come across a ship called the Lancaster. Now, this is a very rare ship that Starfleet had created, and this was based off the Baton Rouge class. So it's real similar in design. And this is the predecessor to the Constitution class starship, okay? So it's a hybrid between advanced technology like phasers and photon torpedoes and our subpar weapons like nuclear missiles and plasma cannons and lasers. Very, very unusual ship. So the ship is very well armed, good shielding, and because it's using modern weapons / older weapons, it actually has a lot of firepower, and it surprises the Klingons. So the Klingons send 3 D4s, and they expect to be able to decimate the Federation starships, but what they're going to find out is the Federation starships are far more powerful than they expected. So these Federation starships are equipped with new generation weapons such as phasers, and this is shocking. Now, as in Klingon style, they will actually engage and they will attack the Federation ships. Now, remember when I was talking earlier about the Klingon weaponry, how it's subpar and it's not at what we would be expecting at this time period. So the D4s are using a previous generation's weapon systems. And so at best, they're using medium class disruptors. Now, they're not disruptors that are what we're going to see in the future. it's not really a very impressive ship, to be honest with you. And what ends up happening is the technology that the Federation has is far beyond what they're expecting. It's a whole generation of new technology. They're using phasers and not lasers. And before the Federation can, or before the Federation, but before the Klingons can really know what's going on, these two ships basically beat the shit out of the D4s. Now, in my opinion, some things become very apparent to the Klingon Empire, especially the Council. Now, this really scares the Klingon Empire. Now, when they do come back and they realize that these ships were completely outgunned, you gotta remember, this is their flagship. 3 versus 2, and they're completely decimated with no kills, and they're completely pushed back. The only reason these Klingon ships survived is the D4 is a relatively large ship and heavily armed. Now, its shields obviously are not as impressive as what we would be seeing on the counterpart here, but my point is that this is a tanky ship, and it was a respectable ship, and it survived this encounter because it had such powerful hull armor and was able to get away and not die. Now, most of the time, Klingons are going to fight to the death. But this fight was so quick and so fast and so overwhelming that they actually retreated because they wanted the Empire to know what they were up against. The Klingon captains were willing to go ahead and become dishonored in order to get this information back to the Klingon Council that these ships were terrifyingly strong compared to what they were taught. Now, when I tell you that they were terrified by this, I mean the Klingons were actually terrified. They were so terrified by this that they actually made a policy that non-ridged Klingons were not allowed to be at the Federation border. So the Federation only saw non-ridged Klingons because the Klingon Empire wanted them to be able to do that and be able to work a spy network against the Federation, because they, at this point, basically the entire council of the Klingon Empire was like together and was like, this is a problem. This is the Ancient One. They are coming for us. We have to prepare, and we don't have the ships to do it. And this is the ideology they have. Now, you also got to think about all the different border problems that the Klingon Empire had at this point. So they took this threat so serious because, you know, you got to understand, at this time period, there was skirmishes going on against the Romulans. There were skirmishes that were going against the Gwar. There were skirmishes probably against other minor races. And then there was obviously the border situation with the Federation. Because of this situation, they stopped their border raiding with the Romulans, they stopped their border raiding with the Gwar, and they stopped their border raiding with just about anyone and every other race out there. And they knew that the D4 was not equipped to fight the Federation starships, and so they started to create a new starship. So the very next year, 2224, the K5 program is put into place, where they're going to start creating they're going to replace the D4 fleet with the K5 series starship. Now, the K5 series ship is unique. It has a kind of a strange looking bubble, and it's got weapons that other ships did not see up until this point, and that would be heavy disruptors. Now, you have to remember there were a lot of the D4 ships, and so what the Klingon Empire started to do is it radically changed their empire. There were two things they did. The most radical is in 2232, they actually granted independence to loyal systems. So systems they had conquered that never tried to rebel after the Klingon Empire defeated them were given their independence. And not only were they given their independence, they were given a contract where they could purchase the D4, the ship that conquered them, as a ship to defend their systems. So they started to sell off these systems. So now they were no longer defending these systems. They were selling off these systems and selling the D4 fleet to independent systems now. These were the two major things. They were giving independence to non-Klingon worlds, and they were selling the D4. So the Klingons started a brand new economy based off their technology to minor races. So another really interesting thing that takes place, and it's kind of, the information here is kind of limited, but for some reason there's a split and there is a civil war between the Klingons, right? And it has something to do with one group and another group thinking that the Federation are the ancient enemy, the Herc, and the other group is thinking that their resources are being wasted because they have a Romulan front, they have a Gorn front, Yeah, the Federation front, and then there's another race that they're dealing with, but basically what comes down to it is the Klingon. One group says, "Hey, we got to deal with the Herc. They're coming for us. They're going to take us over again." The other one saying is, "No, the Federation are just like any other race. They're not really anything to worry about. We need to pay attention to some of these other fronts and not waste our resources with this." This creates a huge amount of infighting. What ends up coming out is the ones that think that the Federation is the Herc, they become victorious and they take over the Klingon government and they start the Klingon task force. So the KDF, which stands for Klingon Defense Force, it takes over, it's set up, and now that's the new setup for the Klingon Empire. Everybody contributes to it, and they are preparing for war with the Federation. So I broke down a simple metric to kind of show you a visual cue of what the ship's shields would basically be like with all their attributes combined. And then I did a breakdown of the actual hull value comparing to the ratios that we have here, and then obviously the weapon value of the ship. To kind of give you an understanding of the disadvantage that the D4 had compared to some of Federation's newer ships at this time. So the ship data here for the Federation ship, I'll be honest with you guys, it's not accurate. So the Lancaster, I don't know any data about it. It's a very, very, very rare ship that was only around for a very short time. And there could be an argument that the Lancaster wasn't the ship that they dealt with. We don't really know what the Federation ships were, but this is what some of the some resources say. So what I did is I took that same kind of formula. I took the destroyer, the Saladan, and that's what that data is. So Federation ships of this time period, basically Federation weaponry was much better than the Klingon weaponry at this point. So then the Klingons needed to build a new ship. So that would lead to the K5. Now, the K5 is known to have two different modules. There's the standard D7-like head ball that we are used to, and then there's a more streamlined version. The only difference between the two is the streamlined version was built for a budgetary reason and existed on the first variants of the K5, but most of them didn't look this way. Now, what makes this ship, obviously, the weird head module, I will make a separate video and talk more about it, but the K5, just remember this ship the idea was building it in mass, preparing for a war. Now, the thing that is important about this is the Klingon Empire really didn't have the budget to build this ship, especially a brand new fleet, but selling off the D4s allowed them to do this. So I'll give you guys a special little sneak peek. I'm going to be making a video later on about the Klingon 4-Year War. I want to talk a little bit about the ships because they're so unknown and they have a lot of history. So if you look right in the middle, you'll see the D4. And I'm showing you how many of these ships were part of the Klingon Defense Force. Even though the D4 was disgraced, there was still a lot of them that were in active duty. And yes, they were kind of retired, but they were doing different jobs along the Empire. They were doing things like trading, they were defending rather than doing offense. They were basically just doing defense. They were protecting shipping lanes, and they're basically being used as a frigate. Now, the variant that we're seeing here, the D4, this one here, is odd and strange as it is. I actually believe that this variant is probably the most technologically advanced of the different versions of the D4 that we see. We don't see this one very often. This is deep in some of the lore and some of the game magazines and stuff, but this is what the D4 would have looked like. But this variant would have been probably produced during the war, of the 4-Year War, or was some of the last variants made. So this would be probably the very, very rarest D4 designation, and it would probably have only been created by major houses or a great house. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.